I feel like I've lost something that used to be very integral to how I saw the world, or at least how I saw myself, and maybe the reflection of the world, how it was filtered back to me, was ultimately through the lens of myself, because that is who I am with all the time, and I can only really know one person on that level. Radical alterations in that perception can shake things up, although not as much for me as for other people. I sort of see myself as someone who is fundamentally the same, but merely updates over time. Someone like my best friend No Thank You is much more a case where there are these radical alterations, these radical shifts in presentation, personality, belief system, and so on, that can seem really jarring when you look at who the guy was just 2 years ago. And while I've learned a lot and I've significantly altered my beliefs in a number of ways, it feels as though the fundamental core underlying all of those assertions and the person making them has remained the same. It's been merely updated in light of new information and new experience and the places where I end up and the things that those places teach me. But here I am with one radical alteration that has been made to me. Maybe the culmination of, or the sum total of my choices have made it like this as well. And in that sense, perhaps some of this is my responsibility, but it's impossible to calculate to what extent either has influence or the most influence. So I'm not going to entertain that numbers game. In any case, something has happened to me that has made me batshit insane when I sleep or when I'm awake for more than 24 hours or even approaching 24 hours. I've almost been awake for 24 hours, and I've already felt like heart issues, general irritability, anxiety. My perception is altered. Like, I look in front of me and everything is more blurry and sharp, and also it all feels elevated. Like, all of my senses are elevated, as though something is gonna come out of a corner at any moment and eat me. I believe this is adrenaline. I believe this is also the dulling of the senses that inevitably occurs when you are running on less resources, which sleep is a resource, and so when your body has less of it, it functions less good. The crazy thing about all of this, though, is I didn't used to be like this. I had another moment tonight where I was quipping at my friend and having some remarks, having a bit of a laugh. It was fun. I was on my shit in a way, but I took a moment to look at the messages that I was sending, and there were like multiple grammatical errors or extra words that didn't need to be there, or words I omitted that I needed to add back in when I read back over it. And this is a normal thing that everyone does when they've had a lot of sleep, but it was rare for me to do it with sleep, basically almost never, and it was rare for me to do it without sleep, basically almost never. And I would do these live streams where I would get into heady, analytical, philosophical subjects and argue with some pretty competent individuals in my live chat at the time. And I would be able to put up strong arguments on the fly about things that I'd either barely thought about or never thought about. And I knew a couple people that came away from those streams and commented on how little sleep I had and how it was like impressive that my mind could produce those responses in that state. At the same time, I've noticed that I've gotten better at certain things. Like, while I've gotten worse at stream of consciousness, being coherent, being interesting, being thought provoking, with multiple days without sleep, I've at the same time gotten better in general at things. I've become more charismatic, more insightful, more experienced. I believe I've gotten better at this YouTube stuff as well. And that doesn't necessarily translate when I'm in a state of heavy sleep deprivation, but it wouldn't for most people. Like, most people would not be able to do what I was doing back then. And so this is a stark contrast for me. But I believe at the root of it, it's getting older. I have gotten older, and I have so many times either forced myself awake for 3 or 4 days on end, or involuntarily was awake for that amount of time due to insomnia and the obligations created by school or work and so on. And that horrendous insomnia, and especially stress, has really done a number on my sleep patterns. Like, it's been really, really bad. And it's led to me staying awake for days sometimes. But I think that's happened so many times that there's this cumulative damage that's just built up and built up and built up that's caused sleep deprivation in general to be a way less functional experience for me. I become dysfunctional without just a little sleep. And this is so different than how it used to work for me. The only reasonable explanation I can give is now I've done it so much that I've taken like a cheese grater to my brain and I shaved off so much that I am simply less functional in this state. Now, that's not a terrible thing. I've noticed this with other stuff too. I used to have a really, really unhealthy diet when I was growing up and in my late teens, and I would eat so much bad stuff, like just stuff you really shouldn't be eating all the time. And I still felt pretty alright. And I thought that like my gut was invincible because I was never nauseous, never throwing up, never got a stomach ache. I thought my brain was invincible because it could sustain itself on little to no nutrition. Like when I was living at my mom's old place and my parents were going back and forth or they were separated, sometimes I would go days without food. And we would dig through the pantry to find years old cans and cobble together something resembling dinner. And then the last of the cupboard would be gone. That would just be it. And I would go 1, 2, sometimes 3 days without eating. I would become so weak that I would just fall over. I just fell over. And it was like in that moment I fainted. And I think I only kept up my energy reserves by always laying down or always sitting down. But I was able to write and make videos during that time. This was 2016 and 2017. I was able to do all that, and I had like laser focus at that time too. I didn't really notice all of this adrenaline that I get now when I'm hungry. I just get so anxious and on edge. Like, I feel like I could eat anything that comes near me, like an animal or anything, you know? And it's a scary feeling, so I just go in the kitchen and I make something, but it's like, that's a scary feeling. It's a scary feeling to easily get an upset stomach and throw up just because you ate fast food. Most of the time, I can't even eat fast food, it upsets my stomach so much. I compare that to just eating whatever growing up or not eating at all. And it makes me think how much things have changed because back then, all I would ever do sometimes was dream about being able to choose my own food and being able to eat regularly. And I thought that was like a dream to be able to do that. But I was still able to maintain my hobbies and I had like laser focus, better focus than I do now. I want to get back that level of focus I used to have. It was really something astounding. I don't have ADHD, but now I'm more ADHD ish than I used to be, which for my standard means a lot. But when I compare myself to people with like actual executive functioning problems, as far as attention is concerned, they blow me out of the water. It's like I seem like a totally normal guy, but I digress. I see these huge changes, and I'm just like, what happened to me? I used to be able to sustain myself on water and like almost no food, or just no food for days, and I could accomplish all that. I could accomplish all the things I described with 2, 3, 4 days without sleep. Can't do that anymore. Now I'm just like freaking out and feeling weird when it's not even been 24 hours yet, when it's nearing the 24-hour point. You know, what happened to me? That's all I have to ask myself is what happened to me. Like, it's so radically different. But I also don't think it's bad. Like, this whole getting older thing definitely means that I'm less capable of straining myself the way that I used to, because that's really what it is. Like, you're straining yourself, you're mistreating yourself by not getting enough to eat, by not sleeping enough. It's going to end up hurting you some way or another, even if it's years down the line. It's a strain that's being put on you. And it's like, is it really that bad of a thing that I can't do that anymore? Probably not. No, it's not a bad thing. But it becomes annoying when something happens that's outside of my control, like deep insomnia or food insecurity. I haven't dealt with food insecurity in a while though, but I don't have to worry about that anymore. But if it were to happen again, like, what would happen to me? What would I do? That's a good question. And that's a hell of a good question. So, I look back and I'm astonished at how much I've changed. But these are really experiential changes, like changes in how I perceive my environment or the world, changes in sensory experience, how I feel it, how it feels, how it looks, smells, and also how it's compartmentalized, which is more of a cognitive process. But all these things and senses put together create your experience. And I think your experience ends up forming the bedrock of who you are and how you see yourself. The influence also gets reversed and goes in the other direction, but you get my point, right? So as I recall these memories and I attempt to put myself in the position of my past self, I can't help but be astonished at how much has changed. But that being said, it seems as though my core desires have all remained the same, as well as more specific ones, and the way I behave and express myself has stayed the same. It's only improved and became more like what it is, which also isn't all too surprising when you think about it. So here I am, alive and awake. I'm pretty glad about the alive part. That's something past me cannot say. But I'm pretty bothered by the awake part. And this is something that past me also couldn't say when they were totally infatuated with late night hours and all nighters. I'm not so much like that anymore. Even when it was against my will, I could enjoy it sometimes. I used to post this study all the time that was like a sleep deprivation as a novel treatment for depression. I was really into that idea. Not so much anymore.